Welcome to This Explainer. We're skipping the dry textbook stuff today and jumping straight into Lesson 1.2, Animal Cells. We are going to explore the absolutely fascinating microscopic world that's operating inside of you, literally, right now.
Okay, let's kick things off with this mind-blowing number, 100 trillion. Just take a second to look at all those zeros. 100 trillion is the current scientific estimate for the exact number of cells inside a human person. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? I mean, to put that into perspective, there are way more individual cells working together inside your body right this second than there are stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy. Now, obviously nobody knows the exact absolute number, but this estimate really gives us a profound sense of scale when we talk about the building blocks of life.
And those building blocks are exactly what we're here to talk about, because humans are biologically animals, right? So every single piece of you is constructed from animal cells. Whether it's the muscle flexing in your arm, the surface of your skin, or the neurons firing in your brain to understand my words right now, they're all made of these microscopic units. It makes this explainer less of a standard biology lesson and more of a literal look in the mirror. You, my friend, are an intricate, walking, talking ecosystem of animal cells.
Part 1, Inside an Animal Cell. Let's zoom all the way in to examine the anatomy of just one of those trillions of microscopic structures. So, when we actually map out the core microscopic structures that keep every animal cell alive and functioning, it looks a bit like a tiny, self-contained water balloon filled with floating objects. Now, sure, animal cells come in all sorts of specialized shapes depending on their actual job in the body, but this generalized diagram strips the whole shebang down to the absolute basics. And you'll notice there are 4 main labels here that we really need to understand.
These 4 components are absolutely crucial, and each one plays a very specific role. Let's walk through them. First up, the cell membrane. This is the very thin, flexible outer boundary. You can think of it like a security gate. It controls exactly what's allowed to go in and out of the cell. Inside that membrane is the cytoplasm. It's a clear, kind of jelly-like substance where all the critical chemical reactions happen that basically keep the cell alive. Floating within that jelly, you've got the mitochondrion. That's the power plant of the cell where energy is actually released from nutrients. And finally, we have the nucleus. This is typically the largest and most visible structure in there, and it acts as the control center, directing all of the cell's activities.
Part 2, Animal versus Plant Cells. Let's examine the cellular differences.
Okay, so the crucial point here is that while both share a nucleus, a cell membrane, mitochondria, and cytoplasm, animal cells entirely lack certain rigid structures. A really great trick from our source text is to remember that plant cells have extra parts that begin with the letter C. So plant cells have a rigid cell wall for support, and many of them have chloroplasts, which contain green chlorophyll to make food from sunlight. Animal cells? They absolutely do not have a cell wall. That's actually why they're often more irregular and flexible in shape, and they definitely don't have chloroplasts, which, is exactly why you don't turn green and photosynthesize when you walk out into the sun.
Part 3, Looking through a microscope. Let's step into our virtual lab and see how we actually observe real cells.
Believe it or not, by simply swabbing the inside of your cheek, you can safely collect loose animal cells. And don't worry, it's completely painless because those inner cheek cells naturally shed all the time anyway. First, you just very gently rub a cotton bud along the inside of your cheek. Next, you take that bud and rub it directly onto the surface of a clean glass microscope slide to transfer the cells. But hey, placing them on a slide is really only half the battle. If you looked under a microscope right at this point, you'd hardly see anything at all.
And why is that? Well, because cheek cells are incredibly tiny and almost completely transparent. So adding a chemical stain is an absolutely required step if you want to actually make those hidden structures visible. For animal cells, we commonly use a drop of dye called methylene blue. What happens is, this stain soaks right into the cell and selectively colors different parts, especially the nucleus, turning them this deep blue color so they boldly stand out against the background. Then, after adding the stain, you carefully lower a really delicate piece of glass called a cover slip right over the top to protect the sample. All right, now you're finally ready to look. Following these strict mechanical steps, make sure you bring those newly stained cells into sharp focus without, accidentally breaking your delicate glass slide. You always want to start by clicking the smallest objective lens into place over the stage, because this gives you the widest field of view. Place your slide over the hole on the stage. Now, here's a pro tip from our source text. Always look from the side when you're initially turning the focusing knob to lower the lens. Seriously, it's just to make sure you don't smash the lens straight through the glass slide. Finally, look down the eyepiece and slowly focus upwards until that microscopic world reveals itself. And this brilliantly illustrates what you might actually see looking down the eyepiece: real, highly magnified cells exhibiting distinctly different shapes and colors. I want you to take a really good look at these 3 distinct photographs from our source material. Notice how the ones on the left and in the middle have these very uniform, block-like structures? They're packed tightly together, kind of like bricks in a wall. But then, look at the image on the far right. Those cells are much more isolated, rounded, kind of irregular. And you can distinctly see a darker dot right in the dead center of each one.
So here is our final microscopic mystery for you. Based on what we just learned about structure, which of these photos show plant cells and which ones are the animal cells? You got to look closely for the presence of rigid walls or irregular, flexible shapes to solve this and test your new knowledge. Remember that C rule we talked about? Those rigid, brick-like walls? Yeah, those are cell walls. That means the photos on the left and middle are definitely plant tissues. And that irregular, bluish cluster on the right with the really obvious dark nucleus in the center and no rigid wall? You guessed it, those are cheek cells. Real animal cells, just like the trillions making up your very own body. But man, it leaves us with such a fascinating question. If animal cells entirely lack those rigid cell walls, what exactly is keeping you from collapsing into a puddle on the floor right now? Keep exploring, and we will absolutely dive into that mystery next time.